I'm Brooke, and I'm 26. 2 days before my mother's wedding to her new husband, I won $180 million in the lottery. I kept quiet, planning a gift that would change her life. But on the day of the ceremony, I received a text message that changed everything. "Daughter, I prefer you don't come. My fiancé thinks you embarrass us." That's when the bank notification came through. Transfer canceled, $22 million. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt like the family disappointment. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Looking back, I should have seen this coming. Mom had me when she was 18, barely out of high school herself. Those early years were actually beautiful, if I'm being honest. She'd sing me to sleep with old Beatles songs, teach me to braid her hair while she studied for her GED, and we'd have pancakes for dinner because she hadn't figured out real cooking yet. But even then, even when I was 3 years old, I could sense something, a restlessness, a searching, like she was always looking past me, waiting for someone more important to walk through the door. The first time I understood what that meant, I was 5 years old. Mom had been dating Jake, this guy who worked construction and rode a motorcycle. I thought he was the coolest person alive because he let me wear his helmet and showed me how to make paper airplanes that actually flew. One Thursday morning, Mom woke me up early, her face flushed with excitement I'd never seen before. "Pack your favorite toys, baby," she said, pulling my little suitcase from under the bed. "We're going on an adventure." I was thrilled. Mom never took days off from her job at the diner, and adventures were rare in our tiny apartment. "Where are we going?" I asked, carefully placing my stuffed elephant next to my coloring books. "To see Jake," she said, and something in her voice made my stomach twist. "He got a job in Denver. Isn't that exciting?" I didn't know where Denver was, but the way she said it made it sound far away. "For how long?" "Well," Mom sat on my bed, smoothing down my hair the way she did when she had something difficult to say. "Maybe for a long time. Maybe forever. Forever." At 5, forever felt impossibly huge. We drove for 3 days, stopping at motels with thin walls and vending machine dinners. Mom sang along to the radio and kept checking her phone for messages from Jake. She was happier than I'd seen her in months, practically glowing with anticipation. When we finally reached Denver, Jake was waiting in the parking lot of our motel, leaning against his motorcycle with his arms crossed. Even from inside the car, I could see he wasn't smiling. Mom killed the engine and turned to me with forced brightness. "Stay here for just a minute, okay? Mommy needs to talk to Jake." I watched through the windshield as they stood 10 feet apart, their conversation growing more animated by the minute. Mom's hands moved frantically as she spoke. Jake shook his head repeatedly. At one point, he glanced toward the car, and the look on his face made me sink lower in my seat. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes. When Mom got back in the car, her face was blotchy and her eyes were red. "Change of plans, baby," she said, her voice artificially cheerful. "We're going to visit Grandma instead. Won't that be fun?" She never explained what happened with Jake. Years later, I figured out he'd told her he wasn't ready to be a father figure, that he'd taken the job to start fresh, not to instantly acquire a family. Mom didn't speak the entire 12-hour drive to Grandma's house in Phoenix. She just gripped the steering wheel and stared ahead while tears slipped down her cheeks. And I learned my first lesson about love. When men don't want you around, you disappear. What I didn't understand then was that this was just the beginning. Mom would spend the next 20 years proving that pattern over and over again. Every relationship brought new possibilities, new versions of herself, new places where I might or might not fit. And somehow, no matter how many times it happened, I never stopped hoping that maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time, I'd be worth choosing. By the time I turned 8, I could predict Mom's relationship patterns better than the weather forecast. She'd meet someone new, and suddenly our entire life would reorganize around their interests, their schedule, their dreams. When she dated Marcus, the soccer coach, our weekends became entirely about youth sports tournaments. Not because I played soccer, I was terrible at it and hated running, but because Marcus needed someone to help with equipment and keep stats. Mom would drag me to muddy fields across 3 counties where I'd sit in folding chairs doing homework while she cheered for other people's kids. "Isn't this exciting, Brooke?" she'd say, bouncing on her toes as Marcus shouted instructions at a group of 10-year-olds. "Marcus thinks I have a real eye for talent." I'd look up from my math problems at the chaos on the field. "Can we go home now?" "After the next game, baby. Marcus really needs my help here." The next game always led to another game, then team dinners at pizza places where I'd sit quietly, while the other parents discussed strategy and scholarships. Mom would laugh louder than anyone, her hand constantly on Marcus's arm, performing happiness so intensely it exhausted me to watch. When Marcus got offered a coaching position in college 3 states away, he asked Mom to come with him. Not us. Just her. I found out about the offer when I walked into the kitchen and saw Mom pacing in circles, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "But what about Brooke?" she whispered. "I can't just—" "She's only 8, Marcus." I froze behind the doorway, my heart hammering. I know you didn't sign up to be a father," Mom continued. "But maybe we could, I don't know, figure something out? Summer visits?" The conversation ended with Mom promising to think about it and call him back. She never mentioned Marcus again after that day, and I never asked what happened. But I knew. I'd heard the defeat in her voice the moment she realized she'd have to choose. For once, she chose me, and somehow, that felt worse than being left behind. Dr. Stevens, the pediatric surgeon, came next when I was 10. Suddenly, our cramped apartment was filled with medical journals, and Mom started using words like humanitarian crisis and global health initiatives. She'd practice pronunciation of places like Bangladesh and Somalia while making dinner, her eyes bright with purpose. "Dr. Stevens is doing incredible work," she'd tell anyone who'd listen. "He's saving children's lives in places where they have no other hope. Can you imagine how meaningful that must be?" I could imagine it, actually. What I couldn't imagine was why that meaning never seemed to extend to the child sitting right in front of her. When Dr. Stevens got approved for a 6-month mission in Somalia, Mom spent weeks researching vaccination requirements and buying specialized luggage. She showed me pictures of the clinic where they'd be working, talking about the children they'd help. "You'll stay with Grandma," she explained, as if spending half a year with a woman I barely knew was a minor detail. "It'll be an adventure for you, too. Why can't I come with you?" Mom's face softened with what she probably thought was kindness. "Oh, baby, it's not safe for children there. And Dr. Stevens needs to focus on his work. This is really important. More important." She didn't say it, but we both understood. The night before she left, Mom sat on my bed and brushed my hair, something she hadn't done in months. "You understand why I have to go, don't you?" she asked. "This is a chance to be part of something bigger than ourselves." I was 10, but I wasn't stupid. I understood perfectly. Her life with me was small, ordinary, not worth choosing when something bigger came along. "Will you write to me?" I asked. "Of course, baby." Every week. She wrote exactly twice in 6 months. Both letters were mostly about the fascinating medical cases and the important work being done. She mentioned missing me once at the very end of the second letter, almost like an afterthought. When she came back, she was different. Tan and confident, full of stories about her meaningful work abroad. She'd found purpose, direction, a version of herself that I'd never seen before. "You grew up so much while I was gone," she said, hugging me at the airport, and I had. 6 months with Grandma had taught me to do my own laundry, make my own breakfast, and most importantly, to stop waiting for someone else to take care of me. Mom spent weeks readjusting to life back home, complaining about how mundane everything felt after the intensity of medical missions. She'd stare out our kitchen window with the same restless expression I remembered from my earliest childhood. Within a month, she was online, researching Dr. Stevens' next assignment. Because that's what love looked like to her, following someone else's dreams to places where you might matter. And me? I was learning to understand that being chosen meant being easy to leave behind. By the time I turned 15, I'd mastered the art of raising myself. Mom's pattern had become so predictable I could set my watch by it. Meet someone, reinvent herself around their life, disappear emotionally if not physically, then act surprised when the relationship ended because she'd lost herself completely in someone else. The weird thing was, I still loved her. Even when she'd forgotten to show up for my school plays or missed my birthday because she was helping her boyfriend of the moment move apartments, I'd make excuses for her. Mom's just passionate about love, I'd tell myself. Like that was a noble character trait instead of a devastating inability to prioritize her own daughter. Richard Campbell entered our lives when I was 24 2 years ago. Unlike her previous boyfriends, Richard wasn't just successful. He was seriously wealthy. Corporate executive type. The kind who wore suits that probably cost more than our monthly rent and checked his phone during conversations like whatever was on that screen mattered more than the human being in front of him. Mom met him at the coffee shop where she'd been working since her latest career reinvention. She'd decided to become a barista because some guy she'd dated briefly was really into coffee culture. That relationship lasted 6 weeks. Her job lasted 2 years, right up until Richard decided her working wasn't necessary anymore. The first time she brought him to dinner at our tiny apartment, I knew we were in trouble. Richard walked through our front door like he was touring a museum of poverty, taking in our secondhand furniture and mismatched dishes with barely concealed distaste. "Charming place," he said, which in rich person speak means absolutely horrifying, but I'm too polite to say so. Mom practically vibrated with nervous energy, rushing around trying to make our space look more impressive. She'd borrowed good wine glasses from our neighbor and hidden all our generic brand groceries in the back of cabinets, as if Richard might open our refrigerator and judge us for buying store-brand ketchup. Brooke's been living on her own since she was 18, Mom explained, like my independence was something she'd intentionally cultivated rather than something I'd developed out of necessity. She's incredibly self-sufficient. Richard's eyes lingered on my work uniform. I was managing a small marketing firm at the time, making decent money but nothing glamorous. That's admirable, he said in a tone that suggested the exact opposite. Not everyone can handle college debt and entry-level positions. I hadn't mentioned college debt. Mom must have told him about my student loans during one of their getting-to-know-you conversations, presenting my financial struggles as casual dinner conversation. Actually, I said, keeping my voice pleasant, I paid off my loans last year, and I've been promoted twice since graduation. Richard raised his eyebrows like this was mildly surprising information. Well, good for you. It's important to have realistic expectations about career advancement. The condescension was so thick I could have spread it on toast. But Mom just smiled and nodded like he'd paid me some kind of compliment. That dinner lasted 3 excruciating hours, during which Richard corrected my pronunciation of finance. Apparently I was saying it wrong. Suggested I might benefit from taking some business courses, despite my business degree, and asked if I'd ever considered expanding my skill set to make myself more marketable. After he left, Mom followed me to the kitchen where I was aggressively washing dishes. "Isn't he wonderful?" she gushed. "So sophisticated, so successful. He really knows how to make something of himself." I scrubbed a plate hard enough to wear off the pattern. "He's certainly confident." "Richard thinks you have potential," she continued, completely missing my tone. "He mentioned he might be able to help you network, introduce you to people who could advance your career." Of course he did. Because nothing said romance like treating your girlfriend's daughter like a charity case. "I'm doing fine on my own, Mom." "I know you are, baby. But Richard has connections you couldn't even imagine. Important people who could really make a difference in your life." I set down the dish I was washing and turned to face her. Mom's cheeks were flushed with excitement, the way they always got when she talked about her latest relationship. She genuinely believed Richard was going to solve all our problems, that his success would somehow transfer to us through proximity. "What about what you want, Mom? What about your own dreams?" She looked confused by the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what do you want to do with your life that doesn't involve adapting to some guy's vision of who you should be?" For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across her face. Then she straightened her shoulders and smiled, that bright, determined smile I knew meant the conversation was over. "Richard makes me happy, Brooke. After everything I've been through, don't I deserve to be happy?" There it was. The unanswerable question she always asked when I tried to point out the pattern. Of course she deserved happiness. But why did her happiness always require erasing herself? 6 months later, Richard proposed during a weekend trip to Napa that I wasn't invited on. Mom called me from the vineyard, sobbing happy tears into the phone while Richard presumably stood nearby, checking his watch and calculating how much the call was costing in international roaming fees. "We're getting married, Brooke. Can you believe it? Me, married to someone like Richard. Someone like Richard. As if she'd won the lottery instead of agreeing to legally bind herself to a man who thought her daughter was an embarrassment." "That's great, Mom," I managed. "Are you happy?" "Happier than I've ever been in my life." And maybe she was. Maybe love really did look like disappearing into someone else's vision of perfection. But watching her transform herself into Richard's ideal woman over the next year was like watching someone slowly erase herself with an invisible eraser. She started shopping at stores she couldn't afford, reading financial publications she didn't understand, and using words like market volatility and portfolio diversification in casual conversation. The wedding was planned for a Saturday in June at Richard's Country Club. 250 guests, mostly his business associates and family members. Mom showed me the guest list exactly once, and my name was near the bottom, listed under miscellaneous family. Miscellaneous. That pretty much summed up my entire relationship with my mother. What she didn't know, what nobody knew, was that everything was about to change. Because 2 days before her perfect wedding to her perfect man, I bought a lottery ticket at the gas station near my apartment. And I won $180 million. The morning I found out I'd won, I sat in my car outside the lottery office for 2 hours just staring at the ticket. $180 million. The numbers were right there in black and white, but my brain couldn't quite process what they meant. I'd bought the ticket on Thursday evening, same as always. Every week for the past 3 years, I'd stop at Murphy's gas station on my way home from work and spend $10 on lottery tickets. Mom always said it was a waste of money. that I'd have better luck throwing my cash directly into the garbage. Richard had actually calculated the statistical improbability of winning during one of his lectures about fiscal responsibility. You'd literally be more likely to be struck by lightning, he'd informed me at Mom's birthday dinner last month. Twice. Well, Richard, apparently lightning does strike twice. The lottery office was surprisingly ordinary for a place where dreams come true. Gray carpet, fluorescent lighting, motivational posters about responsible gaming. The woman behind the counter, Janet, had probably delivered life-changing news to hundreds of people, but she treated my $180 million like it was just another Tuesday transaction. "Congratulations," she said, stamping my paperwork. "Will you be taking the lump sum or annual payments?" Lump sum. I wanted all of it, immediately, before the universe realized it had made a mistake and tried to take it back. "Smart choice," Janet continued. "After taxes, you're looking at about $98 million, still a life-changing amount." Life-changing. She had no idea. I drove home in a daze, my head spinning with possibilities. I could pay off my student loans, all $67,000 of them, without blinking. I could buy a house, travel the world, never worry about money again. I could finally stop calculating whether I could afford groceries for the next 2 weeks. But the first thing I thought about wasn't what I could buy for myself. It was what I could do for Mom. For years, I'd watched her struggle financially. Not dramatically. She wasn't homeless or starving, but in those small, constant ways that wear you down. Buying generic everything at the grocery store, driving a car held together with prayer and duct tape, wearing the same 5 outfits to work because she couldn't afford to replace them. Richard had money, obviously, but he was surprisingly stingy about sharing it. Mom still paid her own rent, bought her own groceries, handled her own expenses. When her car broke down last month, she'd called me asking if I could help with the repair bill, not Richard. "He says it's important for me to maintain my independence," she'd explained, which sounded like rich guy speak for, "I don't want to be responsible for your problems." So when I walked into my apartment that Thursday afternoon, $98 million richer than I'd been that morning, my first instinct was to call her. Then I stopped. What if I did something bigger? What if, instead of just telling her about my windfall, I planned something that would truly change her life? Something that would prove, once and for all, that I'd always loved her despite everything? The idea formed slowly over the next few hours. Mom and Richard's wedding was in 2 days. What if I arranged for a massive financial gift to coincide with their ceremony? Not just a generous wedding present, but something genuinely transformational. Enough money to ensure she'd never have to worry about finances again, never have to depend on Richard's conditional generosity. I called my lawyer. Well, the lawyer I'd hired exactly 4 hours earlier specifically to handle this situation, and explained what I wanted to do. "A $22 million transfer," David repeated slowly, "to your mother's account, as a wedding gift." "Exactly. But I want legal protections in place. If the marriage doesn't work out, if Richard tries to claim any of it, I want ironclad documentation that this money belongs to her alone." David was quiet for a moment. "That's incredibly generous. And yes, we can structure it to protect her interests completely. When did you want this to happen?" "Saturday morning, the day of the wedding. I want it to be a surprise." "Brooke," David said carefully, "that's a lot of money to give someone without discussing it first. Are you sure about this?" I was sure. For the first time in my adult life, I was in a position to take care of Mom the way she'd never quite managed to take care of me. Not because I expected anything in return, but because despite everything, I loved her. And maybe, just maybe, this would finally prove to her that I'd always been worth choosing. Friday night, I couldn't sleep. In less than 24 hours, Mom would wake up to discover she was $22 million richer. I imagined her face when she got the bank notification, the shock and joy and overwhelming relief. For the first time in her life, she wouldn't have to adapt herself to someone else's circumstances. She could be whoever she wanted to be, go wherever she wanted to go. Maybe she'd even realize that her daughter had become someone worth being proud of. I spent most of Friday finalizing the legal paperwork and daydreaming about Mom's reaction. The transfer was set to go through at exactly 10 a.m. Saturday morning, 2 hours before the wedding ceremony. Perfect timing for a perfect surprise. What I didn't expect was waking up Saturday morning to a text message that would change everything. Saturday morning, 8:47 a.m. I was drinking coffee and going over the transfer paperwork one final time when my phone buzzed. Text from Mom. "Daughter, I prefer you don't come today. My fiancé thinks you embarrass us. Hope you understand. We'll call you after the honeymoon." I read it 3 times before the words actually penetrated my brain. You embarrass us. Not, Richard has some concerns, or we'd prefer a smaller ceremony. I embarrass them. Me, the daughter who'd worked 2 jobs to put herself through college. Me, who'd built a career from nothing and never asked them for a dime. Me, who'd spent the last 2 years politely enduring Richard's condescension and Mom's willful blindness to his obvious contempt. I embarrassed them. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. In 73 minutes, $22 million was scheduled to transfer into Mom's account. $22 million I'd planned to give the woman who'd just uninvited me from her wedding because her new husband was ashamed of me. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at that text message and feeling something fundamental break inside my chest. Not heartbreak exactly, more like the sound of a lock clicking permanently shut. Then I called David. "Brooke?" He answered on the first ring. "Is everything okay? The transfer is set to..." "Cancel it." Silence. "I'm sorry?" "Cancel the transfer. All of it. I don't want a single dollar going to her account." "Brooke, slow down. What happened?" I read him the text message, my voice surprisingly steady. When I finished, David was quiet for a long moment. "I see," he finally said. "Are you sure about this? That's a significant amount of money, and this decision feels very emotional right now." "I'm sure." "Okay, I can cancel the transfer immediately. But Brooke, once I do this, the bank will send an automatic notification about the cancellation to the receiving account. Your mother will know that a large transfer was scheduled and then canceled." "Perfect. How large will it show on her end?" "The full amount, $22 million. "Do it." David transferred me to hold while he called the bank. I used those few minutes to pour myself another cup of coffee, my hands finally steady again. The strangest part was how calm I felt. Not angry, not devastated, just done. "It's canceled," David said when he came back on the line. "The bank confirms no funds will transfer, and the cancellation notification will be sent to the receiving account within the next few minutes." "Thank you." "Brooke, are you sure you're okay?" I looked around my apartment, my tiny, humble, embarrassing apartment that I'd worked so hard to afford. "I'm better than okay, David. I'm free." We hung up, and I sat back down at my kitchen table to wait. The call came at 9:23 a.m. "Brooke?" Mom's voice was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "What is this? What is this bank notification? It says a transfer was canceled for $22 million. $22 million. I took a sip of my coffee. "I can hear you, Mom. You don't have to yell. Don't you dare act casual with me right now. Where did this money come from? What transfer? Why was my name on it?" "It was a wedding gift," I said simply. "I won the lottery. I was going to give you $22 million as a surprise for your big day." The silence on the other end was so complete I thought we'd been disconnected. You won the lottery?" Her voice was barely a whisper now. "Thursday, $180 million total. I wanted to share it with you. I thought maybe if you never had to worry about money again, you could finally be yourself instead of whoever Richard wants you to be." Oh my God. "Oh my God, Brooke, this is incredible. This changes everything. I can't believe..." $22 million? Could have been, I corrected. "But then I got your text message this morning." Another silence. Longer this time. "What text message?" "Really? She was going to pretend she didn't remember? The one where you uninvited me from your wedding because I embarrass you and Richard." "Brooke, Her voice trailed off. I didn't mean..." "You did mean it, Mom. You meant every word. And you know what? You were right to send it. It saved me from making a $22 million mistake. Baby, please. You don't understand the pressure I'm under today, the stress of the wedding. Richard has very particular ideas about how things should go. And I just thought, you thought I was an embarrassment. You were probably right about that too. I don't fit into Richard's world, and I don't want to. I'm not sophisticated enough, not polished enough, not worth the risk of having around when he's trying to impress his friends." "That's not true, isn't it?" I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the city below. "When's the last time you defended me to him, Mom? When's the last time you told him I was worth something?" No answer. "I thought so." "Well, here's the thing about that $22 million. It's gone. You made your choice this morning when you sent that text. You chose Richard over me, just like you've chosen every man over me for the past 20 years. And for the first time in my life, I'm choosing myself over you." "Brooke, wait. Don't hang up. We can fix this. I can call Richard, explain everything. You can still come to the wedding. Everything can be like it was before." "No," I said quietly. "It really can't." I hung up the phone and turned off the ringer. Then I ordered Chinese takeout, put on my most comfortable pajamas, and spent my mother's wedding day binge-watching Netflix with $98 million in the bank and absolutely zero regrets. The pounding on my apartment door started at 2:17 p.m., right in the middle of the ceremony that I supposedly wasn't sophisticated enough to attend. I paused my Netflix show and listened. The knocking was frantic. Desperate. Definitely not my elderly neighbor asking to borrow milk. Through the peephole, I could see Mom still in her wedding dress, makeup streaked down her face, hair half fallen from its elaborate updo. She looked like she'd run straight from the altar to my apartment building, which apparently she had. "Brooke?" Her voice was muffled but clearly panicked. "Brooke, please open the door. I know you're in there. We need to talk." I sat back down on my couch. We really don't. Baby, please, I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. Let me in and we can fix this. Can't fix it from out there? The knocking stopped. I could hear her crying through the thin door, gulping sobs that might have broken my heart 6 hours ago. Now they just sounded like an expensive performance. "I left," she said finally. "I left the wedding. I walked out on Richard and 250 guests because I realized what I'd done. You're more important than any of this." I muted the TV and walked closer to the door. "Are you saying that because you love me? Or because I won 180 million? Silence. "That's what I thought. Brooke, that's not fair. You're my daughter. Of course you matter more than money. Do I? Because this morning you uninvited me from your wedding to protect your fiancé's image. But now that you know I'm rich, suddenly I matter again. Funny how that works." Through the peephole, I could see her lean against the hallway wall, her expensive dress wrinkled and stained. "I was scared," she whispered. "Richard has such high standards, and I wanted everything to be perfect. I thought if you weren't there, if it was just his friends and family, maybe he'd finally see me as worthy of his world. And where does that leave me in your world? Mom, you're everything in my world. You always have been." I laughed, surprising myself with how bitter it sounded. "Really? Because my entire childhood suggests otherwise. How many times did you leave me behind for some guy? How many times did you choose their dreams over my needs? That's different. I was young. I was trying to build a life for us. You were trying to build a life for you. I just happened to be along for the ride until someone better came along." The crying got louder, more dramatic. In the past, those tears would have brought me running, desperate to fix whatever was wrong, to prove my love by sacrificing my own needs. But sitting in my apartment with 98 million in the bank and nowhere I had to be, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete indifference to her emotional manipulation. "Brooke, please. I chose you. I left Richard standing at the altar because I chose you." "No," I said, settling back onto my couch. "You chose 22 million. If I'd won $50 instead of 50 million, you'd still be at that country club cutting cake and making small talk about market volatility." "That's not true." "Prove it." Another silence. Longer this time. "What do you mean?" "I mean, prove that you left because you love me, not because you want my money. Prove that your choice has nothing to do with the lottery." Through the door, I could hear her shifting around, probably trying to find a comfortable position in that ridiculous dress. "How do I prove something like that?" "Go back." "What?" "Go back to your wedding. Marry Richard. Tell him you had a panic attack or wedding jitters or whatever rich people call it when they temporarily lose their minds. Finish what you started. But what about us? What about fixing our relationship? If you really want to fix our relationship, Mom, you'll do it because you love me, not because I can afford to pay for your mistakes. Go back to Richard. Live your life. Make your choices. And maybe someday we can figure out if there's anything real left between us." The hallway was quiet for several minutes. Then I heard footsteps walking away. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a text from Richard's cousin, whom I'd met exactly once. "Your mother made it back. Told everyone she had a panic attack, but she's fine now. Ceremony resuming in 10 minutes. So she went back. She chose Richard after all, just like I knew she would." I spent the rest of the evening in my embarrassingly small apartment, eating Chinese food out of cardboard containers and thinking about how much everything had changed in 24 hours. This morning, I'd been a broke marketing manager whose mother was ashamed of her. Tonight, I was worth 98 million and my mother was legally bound to a man who thought I was an embarrassment. Funny how winning the lottery hadn't changed the important things at all. My phone rang around 11 p.m. Mom, probably calling from her wedding night hotel room while her new husband showered off the stress of the day. I didn't answer. Some choices, once made, can't be undone, and some relationships, once broken, aren't worth the cost of repair. Tomorrow, I'd start figuring out what my new life looked like. Tonight, I'd just sit here feeling grateful that I'd finally learned the difference between being loved and being useful. The difference, it turns out, is about $22 million. 3 weeks after her wedding, Mom started calling every day. Not to apologize, that would have been too simple, but to check in and rebuild our relationship. Amazing how my emotional well-being became a priority right after she discovered I was worth $98 million. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began during her 5th call this week. About proving that I love you for you, not for your money. I was at my lawyer's office, signing papers to establish a charitable foundation. David had become more than my attorney. He'd become the voice of reason I desperately needed. And how exactly do you plan to prove that, Mom? Well, I was thinking we could start having regular dinners again. Just us. Like we used to. Like we used to. When exactly was that? I couldn't remember a single period in my life when Mom and I had regular mother-daughter dinners without some boyfriend hovering in the background, dictating the conversation. That sounds nice, I said, watching David organize documents. But I'm pretty busy these days. Busy with what? Brooke, honey, you don't need to work anymore. You could quit your job, travel, enjoy your life. There it was. She'd been thinking about my money, calculating what my new lifestyle should look like, probably discussing it with Richard, who'd no doubt have opinions about proper wealth management. Actually, I like my job, but surely you can take some time off. Maybe we could plan a trip together. I've always wanted to see Europe. I almost laughed. Mom had wanted to see Europe when she was dating Marcus, the soccer coach, too, and when she was with Dr. Stevens, and probably with half a dozen other men who'd promised to show her the world. The difference was, now she thought I could pay for it. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course, baby. In the 3 weeks since your wedding, how many times have you fought with Richard about me? Silence. Because I'm guessing he's not thrilled about his new wife having a millionaire daughter who embarrasses them at social events. Richard is adjusting to the news. Adjusting. Right. What did he say when you told him you'd left the wedding to chase after me? Another pause. He was confused, hurt. He didn't understand why I would abandon our special day for a family drama. Family drama. That's what my mother's love for me had become in Richard's vocabulary. And she'd adopted his language without even realizing it. And what did you tell him? I explained that you were upset about not being invited, and that I felt guilty about the misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. Not, I made a terrible mistake, or I chose a man over my daughter again. A misunderstanding. So you didn't tell him you'd realized you were wrong to prioritize his comfort over your relationship with me? Brooke, it's more complicated than that. Richard has a certain position in society, and I'm still an embarrassment. That's not what I said. It's what you meant. Mom, here's the thing. I don't care about Richard's position in society. I don't care about his country club friends or his business associates or his opinion of my career or my apartment or my life. What I care about is that my mother chose his approval over her daughter's presence on the most important day of her life. I was trying to protect our future, she said quietly. If Richard was unhappy, if the marriage got off to a bad start because of family conflict, then you'd blame me for ruining your relationship. Just like you've blamed me for every failed relationship since I was 5 years old. That hit home. I could hear her sharp intake of breath through the phone. I never blamed you for my relationship's ending. Really? Because I distinctly remember you telling me that Jake might have stayed if I'd been easier to handle. And Marcus said I was too demanding when I asked for help with homework during his tournaments. And Dr. Stevens specifically mentioned that children complicate international assignments. Those were different situations. Were they? Or is this the same pattern we've been dancing for 20 years? With the only difference being that now I have enough money to walk away from it? The silence stretched for a full minute. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice smaller than I'd heard in years. What do you want from me, Brooke? How do I fix this? It was the right question, but about 20 years too late. I don't want anything from you, Mom. That's what I've been trying to tell you. For the first time in my life, I don't need you to choose me or protect me or prioritize me. I'm financially independent, emotionally stable, and completely capable of building a life without your approval. But I want to be part of your life. Then prove it. Stop calling me to plan Europe trips I'd pay for. Stop suggesting I quit my job because you think rich people don't work. Stop trying to manage my relationship with Richard when you can't even manage your own. Just be my mother. Without an agenda. What do you think will happen next? Do you believe people can really change? Or are we all doomed to repeat the same patterns forever? Let me know in the comments below. The conversation ended with vague promises to think about what I'd said, but I wasn't holding my breath. After all, Mom had been thinking about a lot of things for 2 decades, and somehow she always reached the same conclusions. 2 days later, David called with news that would change everything. Brooke, we have a problem. Your mother has filed a legal claim against your lottery winnings. I nearly dropped my coffee. She what? She's claiming that as your immediate family, she has legal rights to a portion of your winnings. Her lawyer is arguing that your ticket purchase was made possible by years of financial and emotional support she provided, making her essentially a silent partner in your investment. The audacity was breathtaking. David, she didn't give me financial support. I've been financially independent since I was 18. I know. But she's also claiming that your decision to cancel the $22 million transfer was made under emotional duress, and that you lack the capacity to manage such a large sum responsibly. I sat down hard in my kitchen chair. She's trying to have me declared incompetent? Essentially, yes. It's a long shot. But it's going to require us to respond formally, which means this is going to get very public, very messy, and very expensive. Looking back, I should have seen this coming. Mom had spent my entire childhood teaching me that love was conditional, that care came with strings attached, that family loyalty was a one-way transaction. Why would $100 million change the fundamental math of our relationship? But sitting in my kitchen that morning, reading the legal papers David had messengered over, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete clarity about who my mother really was. And for the first time in 26 years, I was ready to stop pretending otherwise. The legal papers made for fascinating reading if you enjoyed creative fiction. According to Mom's attorney, I was an unstable young woman who'd always struggled with family relationships and poor decision-making. The lottery win had apparently triggered a psychological break that left me unable to manage my finances responsibly. The evidence for my supposed mental instability? Canceling a $22 million gift to my mother. The plaintiff's daughter has demonstrated a pattern of impulsive, vindictive behavior. The filing read. Her decision to cancel a substantial financial transfer on the morning of the plaintiff's wedding ceremony indicates severe emotional dysfunction and potential financial self-harm. I had to admire the spin. In Mom's version of events, her text message uninviting me from her wedding was a minor miscommunication between stressed family members. My response was disproportionate retaliation suggesting underlying mental health issues. David spread the documents across his conference table, shaking his head. This is one of the more creative approaches I've seen. Essentially, she's arguing that you're too mentally unfit to control your own money, and that she should be appointed as your financial guardian. Can she do that? She can try. But Brooke, they're going to have to prove their case, and frankly, they don't have much to work with. You're 26, college-educated, employed, with no history of mental illness or financial irresponsibility. Plus, we have documentation of your mother's complicated relationship with supporting you financially. I'd spent the previous week gathering evidence of my own. Bank statements showing I'd been financially independent since 18. Tax returns proving steady employment and responsible money management. College transcripts, employment reviews, references from friends and colleagues who could testify to my stability and competence. But the most damaging evidence against Mom's case was the documentation of her pattern of financial neglect throughout my childhood. I want to countersue, I told David. He raised his eyebrows. For what? Emotional damages. 20 years of prioritizing boyfriends over her daughter's emotional needs, financial abandonment, creating an unstable childhood environment that forced me to become financially independent as a teenager. Brooke, I understand you're angry, but I'm not angry, David. I'm done. She wants to make this about my mental fitness. Let's make it about her parental fitness. The countersuit we filed painted a very different picture of our family dynamic. 20 years of documented neglect, abandonment, and emotional manipulation. School records showing emergency contacts because Mom was traveling with whatever boyfriend she was following that month. Financial aid applications where I'd had to list myself as an independent student because she wasn't providing support. The most devastating evidence was Mom's own social media history, which told the story of 2 decades of romantic relationships, where I was either absent from photos entirely or relegated to the background while she performed happiness with her latest partner. Your Honor, David said during our preliminary hearing, the plaintiff's claim that she supported her daughter financially is contradicted by extensive documentation showing that Ms. Brooke Mitchell has been financially independent since age 18. Moreover, the plaintiff's pattern of romantic relationships consistently prioritized her partners over her daughter's emotional needs, creating an environment where Ms. Mitchell learned to rely solely on herself. Mom's lawyer, a slick guy in an expensive suit that Richard had probably paid for, tried to paint me as an ungrateful daughter who'd turned vindictive after becoming wealthy. The defendant's refusal to share her windfall with the woman who raised her demonstrates a callous disregard for family bonds and basic human decency. Basic human decency. That was rich, coming from someone representing a woman who'd uninvited her own daughter from her wedding. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, seemed unimpressed with Mom's arguments. Counsel, are you arguing that winning the lottery creates an obligation to share those winnings with family members? We're arguing that the defendant's decision-making process was compromised by emotional instability, and that her refusal to honor her original intention to gift money to her mother indicates poor judgment. Her original intention was to gift money to her mother as a wedding present, the judge noted, flipping through our filings. According to these documents, the mother then sent a text message uninviting her daughter from the wedding ceremony. Is that correct? Mom's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, that was a miscommunication during a stressful time. Counsel, I'm asking about facts, not interpretations. Did the plaintiff send her daughter a message stating that she preferred her daughter not attend the wedding? A long pause. Yes, Your Honor. And the defendant responded by canceling the financial gift? Yes, Your Honor, but which suggests her decision-making was quite logical, actually. If someone disinvites me from their wedding because I embarrass them, I probably wouldn't give them $22 million either. I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling. The hearing lasted 2 hours, during which Mom's case fell apart like a house of cards in a hurricane. By the end, even her expensive lawyer looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. The plaintiff's motion is denied, the judge ruled. Furthermore, this court finds the claim to be frivolous and without merit. Ms. Mitchell, you are under no legal obligation to share your lottery winnings with anyone, regardless of family relationship. Case dismissed. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because I'd won, the outcome was never really in doubt, but because the last illusion about my relationship with Mom had finally been shattered. She'd literally tried to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could steal my money. And somehow, that clarity was the most liberating gift she'd ever given me. The phone calls started immediately after the court dismissal. Not from Mom. She was apparently too embarrassed to contact me directly, but from Richard's family members. Mutual acquaintances, even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Brooke, this is your cousin Jennifer. I hope you understand that your mother is just confused right now. The stress of the wedding, the shock of your lottery win, it's been overwhelming for her. Confused. That was the word everyone seemed to be using to describe a grown woman who'd tried to legally steal her daughter's money. Jennifer, she filed a lawsuit claiming I was mentally incompetent. That's not confusion, that's calculation. Well, maybe if you just talk to her. I hung up. Jennifer called back twice. I didn't answer. Uncle Paul left a voicemail. Brooke, honey, I know families go through rough patches, but this has gone too far. Your mother raised you by herself, sacrificed so much for you. The least you could do is share some of your good fortune. Sacrificed so much. What had Mom sacrificed exactly? Every major decision she'd made prioritized her own romantic happiness over my needs. The only sacrifice she'd ever made was giving up potential relationships with men who didn't want children around, and she'd made it very clear that those sacrifices weren't voluntary. Even my grandmother called, her voice weak but determined. Brooke, I don't understand what's happening with you and your mother, but this lawsuit business is tearing the family apart. Can't you just give her some money and end all this foolishness? Just give her some money. As if 26 years of emotional abandonment could be resolved with a financial transaction. But it was Richard's sister who delivered the most revealing message. Brooke, Richard is very concerned about how this legal situation is affecting his wife's mental health. Perhaps we could arrange a mediated settlement that would be acceptable to everyone. His wife's mental health, not his stepdaughter's relationship with her mother. Not the damage this lawsuit was doing to our family. His wife's mental health, and by extension, his own comfort and reputation. I listened to all these messages while sitting in my lawyer's office, reviewing the settlement offers that kept arriving via Mom's attorney. They're starting at $50 million, David reported. 50% of your after-tax winnings. They're framing it as a fair division of family assets. Family assets. I laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. David, what percentage of my childhood expenses did my mother actually pay? He flipped through the financial analysis we'd prepared for the countersuit. Based on your school records, living arrangements, and documented support, roughly 60%. You were financially responsible for yourself starting around age 16. So she wants 50% of money I won as an adult, after paying for 40% of my childhood. The math is not in her favor. No. The offers kept coming down. 40 million, 30, 20. With each reduction, the language in the settlement proposals became more desperate, more manipulative. The plaintiff wishes to restore family harmony and believes a financial gesture would demonstrate good faith from both parties. One letter read, a financial gesture. They wanted me to pay for the privilege of being treated like a human being by my own mother. What if we counter-offer? David suggested. Not a settlement of their lawsuit. We won that already. But maybe a one-time gift, on your terms, with clear documentation that it's voluntary and ends any future financial claims? I thought about it for 3 days. Not because I was tempted to give Mom millions of dollars, but because I was trying to figure out if there was any part of me that still hoped our relationship could be salvaged. The answer was no, but there was something else. A tiny seed of what I can only describe as pity. Not for the woman who'd abandoned me emotionally for 2 decades, but for the woman so desperate for male approval that she'd sacrifice her relationship with her only child for it. I want to make one final offer, I told David. $2 million. Not a settlement, a gift. With ironclad legal language stating that this ends any and all future financial claims from her or anyone acting on her behalf. $2 million is generous. Brooke. Much more generous than the situation warrants. It's not about what she deserves, David. It's about who I want to be. I don't want to be someone who could help and chose not to, even if the person needing help has treated me terribly. The papers were drawn up within a week. $2 million? Transferred directly to an account in Mom's name only, with legal protections ensuring Richard couldn't touch it. The agreement included language stating that this was a final, voluntary gift that ended all financial obligations between us. She has 48 hours to accept or reject the offer, David explained. If she rejects it or tries to negotiate, the offer is permanently withdrawn. Mom accepted within 6 hours. The transfer went through on a Friday afternoon. I got the bank confirmation at 3:47 p.m., $2 million, successfully deposited into Linda Mitchell Campbell's account. I felt exactly nothing. That night, I called my travel agent and booked a flight to Portugal, a country I'd dreamed of visiting since college but could never afford. One-way ticket, leaving in 2 weeks. How long will you be staying? She asked. I don't know yet. Maybe forever. For the first time in my adult life, I was free to go anywhere, be anyone, start over completely. No family obligations, no guilt, no one else's needs to consider before my own. The woman who'd taught me that love was conditional and approval had to be earned had finally set me free, even if that hadn't been her intention. And for that, $2 million seemed like a bargain. Portugal was supposed to be a vacation. 3 weeks in Lisbon, maybe a trip to Porto. Some time to think about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life now that money wasn't a concern. I booked a beautiful apartment in the Alfama district, with views of red tile roofs and the Tagus River. What I didn't expect was to fall completely in love with the country. There's something about Lisbon that gets into your soul. The way the light hits the pastel buildings at sunset, turning everything golden and magical. The sound of fado music drifting from tiny restaurants tucked into narrow cobblestone streets. The warmth of people who'd lived through dictatorship and revolution and emerged with this incredible appreciation for simple pleasures. Good food, strong wine, time with family that actually meant something. I extended my trip twice, then started looking at real estate. The apartment I bought was in a restored 18th century building with original tile work and a terrace overlooking the city. 3 bedrooms, which seemed excessive for one person, but I had plans. I wanted space for an office where I could work on the travel blog I'd started, space for guests who might actually want to visit me, space to become whoever I was meant to be when I wasn't constantly managing someone else's emotional crisis. The process of buying property in Portugal as an American was complicated but not impossible, especially when you had lawyers and money to smooth the way. Within 6 months, I was a legal resident with a beautiful home and a growing network of friends who knew me as Brooke, the American writer, not Brooke, the lottery winner with family drama. I kept my phone number but changed my address with everyone except David and my bank. No forwarding information for family members, no way for Mom or Richard or anyone from my old life to show up at my door with new demands or manipulations. The freedom was intoxicating. I woke up when I wanted, ate what I craved, spent my days exploring museums and markets and beaches along the coast. I learned basic Portuguese, took cooking classes, joined a hiking group that met every Saturday to explore different regions of the country. For the first time in my adult life, my relationships were reciprocal. When my friend Anna invited me for dinner, it was because she enjoyed my company, not because she needed something. When Carlos, the guy who owned the bakery down the street, saved me the last pastéis de nata, it was kindness without agenda. 3 months into my new life, I got an email from Jennifer, my cousin back home. Brooke, I hope you're doing well wherever you are. I wanted you to know that your mom and Richard are having some problems. The money you gave her has caused a lot of tension in their marriage. Apparently Richard feels like she went behind his back by accepting it, and she's frustrated that he thinks he should have a say in how she spends her money. They're in counseling, but it's not going well. I thought you should know. In case you wanted to reach out. I read the email twice, then deleted it without responding. Mom's marriage problems weren't my responsibility anymore. The money I'd given her was meant to provide financial security, nothing more. If she and Richard couldn't navigate the emotional implications of that gift, it wasn't my job to fix it. A week later, another email from a different relative. Your mother really misses you, Brooke. I know you're angry, but holding grudges isn't healthy. Family is family. Family is family. The rallying cry of people who'd enabled dysfunction for years rather than address it. I started an auto-reply message. Thank you for your concern. I'm doing very well in my new life. Please don't contact me about family matters. as I'm no longer available for those discussions. The emails stopped after that. 6 months in Portugal became a year. I published my travel blog as a book, started a consulting business helping Americans navigate international relocations, and bought a small vineyard in the Douro Valley as an investment and a creative project. I dated a few people. A Portuguese architect who was brilliant and kind but ultimately wanted different things, a British expat who was lovely but too recently divorced to be serious about anyone. Nothing dramatic or complicated, just normal adult relationships that ended amicably when we realized we weren't compatible. It was revolutionary. This idea that relationships could end without trauma or manipulation, or someone being branded the villain. On the first anniversary of my arrival in Portugal, I was sitting on my terrace with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint Lisbon in shades of gold and pink, when my phone rang. Unknown international number. Probably spam, but something made me answer. Brooke? Mom's voice was smaller than I remembered, tentative in a way that sounded genuinely uncertain rather than manipulative. Hello, Mom. I didn't know if you'd answer. I wasn't even sure this number still worked. It works. How did you get it? I hired a private investigator. I know that sounds terrible, but I needed to know if you were okay. You just disappeared, and no one would tell me where you'd gone. I took a sip of wine and watched a couple walking hand in hand down the street below. I'm fine, Mom. Better than fine, actually. Are you coming home? This is home now. A long pause. Brooke, I know I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. The lawsuit was Richard's idea, but I went along with it, and that was wrong. I've been in therapy, trying to understand why I keep making the same choices over and over. That's good. Mom, everyone can benefit from therapy. Richard and I are getting divorced. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, no sadness. Just a mild interest like hearing about the weather in a place you'd never visit. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Because I left him, Brooke. I finally chose differently. I chose myself. And by extension, I chose you. Doesn't that count for something? It was the right question. But about 15 years too late. Mom, I'm glad you're making healthier choices. But you didn't choose me when it mattered. You chose me when your marriage became inconvenient, which isn't the same thing. So that's it? You're never coming home? Never speaking to me again? I looked out at the city I'd grown to love, at the life I'd built from nothing, at the peace I'd found when I'd stopped trying to earn love that was never really available. I don't know, Mom. Maybe someday we'll have a different conversation, but right now, I'm exactly where I need to be. After we hung up, I sat on my terrace until the stars came out, thinking about patterns and choices, and the difference between loving someone and being available for their dysfunction. Mom was finally in therapy, finally questioning the choices she'd made for 26 years. That was progress, even if it was 20 years overdue. But her journey toward emotional health wasn't mine to manage anymore. I'd spent enough time trying to love someone into making better choices. Now, finally, I was choosing myself. The second year in Portugal brought unexpected clarity about what I'd actually escaped when I left America. It wasn't just Mom's dysfunction. It was an entire ecosystem of people who'd normalized emotional manipulation as family loyalty. I realized this when my grandmother died and I flew back for the funeral. The church was full of relatives I hadn't seen in 2 years, all of whom seemed shocked by my appearance. I'd lost weight in Portugal, not from stress, but from hiking and swimming and eating fresh food instead of convenience meals. My hair was longer, my skin was tanned, and I carried myself differently, like someone who'd never had to apologize for taking up space. Brooke! Aunt Linda grabbed my arm as I walked into the church. You look so different. Are you okay? I'm great, actually, really great. She studied my face like she was searching for signs of the person she remembered, the anxious young woman who'd spent every family gathering managing other people's emotions. We've all been so worried about you, disappearing like that. Your mother has been heartbroken. I looked across the church to where Mom sat in the front pew, dressed in black, accepting condolences from a steady stream of visitors. She looked older, thinner, and genuinely sad about losing her mother, but she also looked smaller somehow, like someone who'd spent the past 2 years learning uncomfortable truths about herself. She looks like she's managing, I said. Brooke, this coldness isn't like you. Grandma always said you had the biggest heart in the family. There it was. The subtle accusation disguised as a compliment. The implication that I'd become someone cruel by refusing to absorb other people's dysfunction. I still have a big heart, Aunt Linda. I just don't use it to enable people anymore. The funeral service was beautiful. Grandma had lived to 93, had seen her children and grandchildren grow up, had died peacefully in her sleep. If you had to go, it was the way to do it. During the reception, I found myself in conversation with cousins and family friends who peppered me with questions about my mysterious disappearance and hermit lifestyle in Europe. The assumption seemed to be that I'd run away from life rather than toward something better. "So, what do you do all day?" my cousin Mark asked. "Just travel around drinking wine?" "I run a business helping Americans relocate internationally. I wrote a book about cultural integration. I'm learning Portuguese and Spanish. I volunteer at a literacy program for immigrants." He looked confused, like this information didn't fit his mental image of me as a broken person hiding from reality. "But don't you miss home? Miss your family?" I looked around the church basement at these people who'd enabled 20 years of dysfunction, who'd watched my mother prioritize boyfriends over her daughter and called it love, who'd remained silent when I was disinvited from her wedding but criticized me for not sharing lottery winnings. "This isn't home anymore," I said simply. The conversation that mattered happened when Mom approached me as I was leaving. "Brooke, could we talk? Just for a few minutes?" We walked to a quiet corner of the parking lot, away from the clusters of relatives sharing memories and making plans for holiday gatherings I wouldn't attend. "You look happy," she said, and there was something in her voice I'd never heard before. Genuine observation without agenda. "I am happy. I've been in therapy for 8 months now, learning about attachment styles and generational trauma and all these patterns I never recognized in myself. That's good. Mom, I'm glad you're doing that work. My therapist says I have an anxious attachment style that makes me seek validation through romantic relationships, usually at the expense of other important connections." She paused, looking down at her hands. "She says I taught you to expect inconsistency from people who claim to love you." It was the most self-aware thing I'd ever heard her say. Probably true. "I want to do better, Brooke. I want to learn how to be your mother without needing you to manage my emotions or fix my problems." "Mom, that's great. I genuinely hope you succeed. But you don't want to be part of that process." I thought about it carefully, looking at this woman who'd given birth to me but had never really learned how to be my parent. She was trying now, at 50, to become the person she should have been when she was 20. The effort was admirable, but it wasn't my responsibility to support. "I want you to be happy and healthy," I said finally, "but I don't want to be your practice space for learning how to have functional relationships. I spent 26 years being your emotional support system while you figured out how to love men more than your daughter. I'm done with that job." Her face crumpled, but she nodded. "I understand. Do you? Because understanding and accepting are different things." "I accept it," she said quietly. "I don't like it, but I accept it. You have the right to protect yourself from people who've hurt you, even if one of those people is me." We stood in the parking lot for another few minutes, two women who shared DNA but had never really known each other as people. There was sadness in it, but not regret. Some relationships are too damaged to repair, and acknowledging that truth can be its own form of healing. "I love you, Brooke. I know I never showed it properly, but I do love you. I know you do, Mom, in the only way you knew how." I flew back to Portugal the next day, carrying with it a sense of completion I hadn't expected. Mom was finally doing the work she should have done decades ago. It was too late to repair our relationship, but it wasn't too late for her to become the person she was meant to be. And for me, it was confirmation that I'd made the right choice in building a life where love wasn't conditional, where I didn't have to earn my place in people's affections, where my worth wasn't determined by my usefulness to others. Some bridges burn for good reasons. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let them stay burned and build a better life on the other side. 5 years later, I'm sitting on my terrace in Porto, where I moved after buying and renovating a small quintal in the heart of the city. It's early morning, and the Douro River is reflecting the first light of dawn off the water. I've got a cup of perfectly brewed coffee, a pastry from my favorite bakery, and a sense of contentment that still surprises me sometimes. Yesterday, I got an email from a journalist writing an article about lottery winners and what happens to their money. She'd somehow tracked me down and wanted to interview me about my unique approach to managing sudden wealth. "Most people who win large amounts either go broke within a few years or become isolated by their money," she wrote. "But you seem to have used your winnings to build an authentic life. How did you do it?" The answer, I realized, wasn't about money management or investment strategies or any of the practical advice financial planners give lottery winners. It was about learning the difference between being loved and being useful. For 26 years, I'd confused my mother's need for me with love. Every time she came back from following some boyfriend to a new city, every time she called in crisis, every time she needed emotional or financial support, I interpreted that need as proof that I mattered to her. But need isn't love. Dependence isn't connection. And being someone's emotional dumping ground isn't the same as being their beloved daughter. The lottery didn't teach me that lesson. It just gave me enough resources to act on what I'd always known, but been afraid to acknowledge. I've built a good life here. My consulting business helps 20 to 30 Americans each year navigate the complex process of relocating to Europe. My book about cultural integration has been translated into 4 languages. I own 3 properties now: my home in Porto, a small apartment in Lisbon that I rent out, and that vineyard in the Douro Valley that's actually turning a profit. But the real wealth isn't financial. It's the relationships I've built with people who like me for who I am, not what I can provide. It's the freedom to make choices based on my own values rather than other people's expectations. It's waking up every morning in a place I chose because it makes me happy, not because someone else needed me to be there. I date occasionally. There's a Portuguese winemaker named Miguel who makes me laugh and cooks incredible seafood dinners and doesn't care that I won the lottery because he's never heard of American lottery systems and thinks they sound unnecessarily complicated. We've been seeing each other for 8 months now, and it's the healthiest relationship I've ever had because neither of us needs the other to fix anything. 6 months ago, I got a letter, actual handwritten letter, not email, from Mom. She's been divorced from Richard for 3 years now. She's still in therapy, still working on understanding her patterns. She's dating someone new, a widowed teacher named Frank who sounds refreshingly normal based on her description. I know you don't want to hear from me, the letter said, but I wanted you to know that I finally understand what you meant about choosing yourself. I'm learning to be alone without being lonely, to make decisions based on what I want instead of what I think will make someone else stay. It's harder than I expected, but it's the first time in my adult life that I feel like myself. She didn't ask for anything. No requests to visit, no suggestions that we rebuild our relationship, no guilt about my absence from her life. Just information shared without agenda, which was maybe the most motherly thing she'd ever done. I didn't respond to the letter, but I didn't throw it away either. It sits in a box with other important documents. Not treasured, but acknowledged as part of a story that shaped me even as I chose to write a different ending. Yesterday, I was walking through the market near my house when I overheard 2 American tourists discussing family obligations. One was explaining to the other why she couldn't take a job promotion that would require relocating because her adult siblings needed her to stay close to home. Family is everything, she said, with that particular strain in her voice that suggested she was trying to convince herself as much as her friend. You can't just abandon people who love you. I wanted to tap her on the shoulder and explain that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's dysfunction. That real love doesn't require you to sacrifice your dreams to make other people comfortable. That choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary for building the kind of life that's actually worth living. But she'll figure it out eventually. Or she won't. That's not my responsibility anymore. Tonight, Miguel is cooking dinner at my house. Ana and Carlos are coming over with their kids, who've adopted me as their American aunt, and insist on practicing their English during every visit. We'll eat too much food, drink good wine, and argue about football in a mixture of Portuguese and English that shouldn't work but somehow does. It's a simple evening with people who care about me without conditions, people who've never asked me for money or favors or emotional management services, people who see me as complete exactly as I am. The lottery gave me $98 million, but walking away from a family that saw me as an ATM with abandonment issues gave me something more valuable. The chance to discover who I actually am when I'm not constantly trying to earn love that was never really available. Mom taught me that love is conditional, that approval must be earned, that family loyalty flows in only one direction. She was wrong about all of it. But learning that truth was the most valuable education I ever received. Some people are born understanding their worth. Others have to win the lottery and lose their family to figure it out. I'm grateful it only took me $22 million and 26 years to learn that the most important choice I'd ever make was choosing myself. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like you had to earn love that should have been freely given, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about choosing yourself over dysfunction, even when that choice comes with a price tag. Because freedom, I've learned, is always worth the cost.